John Tamny is our clearest writer on business and economics today because he's our clearest thinker. He seems to have a way of filtering out the junk and getting all the way to the key point. Some of us struggle with defining the entrepreneurial function of creating new value. John doesn't. He has the answer. Entrepreneurs are crazy people.
This is the Value Creators Podcast. Value creation is the sole purpose of any business and every business, and for all of us as entrepreneurs. Listen to great value creators as they share their successes, trials, and lessons learned. Join us as we explore how to think as value creators, how to act as value creators, and how to view business through the lens of value creation.
Our guest today, I'm delighted to say, is John Tamny. John is the editor of RealClearMarkets. He's vice president at FreedomWorks. He's a senior fellow at the Market Institute and a senior economic advisor to Applied Finance Advisors. His latest book is The Money Confusion: How Illiteracy About Currencies and Inflation Sets the Stage for the Crypto Revolution. We'll mention that today, but mostly we're going to talk about an article he wrote at RealClearMarkets entitled Entrepreneurs Don't Meet Needs, which is the standard business school jargon. They lead needs, which is what our great entrepreneurs like Elon Musk and Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos and Sam Altman have always known. But how do they do that? John knows. John, welcome to the Value Creators Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm a big fan.
Yes, I've been following you for a long time, and as I said, it's been good to me. Today we're going to feature an article that you wrote, and more specifically, a piece of thinking that you initiated. And it articulates the magic and brilliance of entrepreneurs better than anyone's ever done it before, I think. It really struck me. You said that entrepreneurs don't meet needs, they lead them. And we're constantly discussing in business school and articles and so on like that about meeting needs. But you said, no, they tell people what to want before people know what to want. And there's something clever about that. So tell us about the subject, Mary Quant. Not everybody will know who she is, probably. And then how it generated that line of thinking.
Well, yeah, Mary Quant was a British designer in the 1960s who just thought the existing fashion in London then was staid and behind the times. And so she could have done as designers did and just continue to create what people wore. But she thought, wait a second, no, that doesn't look good to me. She led people in all new directions. She said, I knew I could get customers to a new place. I just have to create new clothes for them. And so she brought basically the length of skirts up and everything. She brought the swinging 60s to London with an all new way of looking at clothes. And that's what entrepreneurs do. I think a lot of the reason people talk about needs is von Mises, who was brilliant, talked about unmet needs. And, that's real. That's not nothing. But entrepreneurs ultimately lead us to an all new place. That's why they're entrepreneurs. They see things as they exist and think, oh, we can do much better.
Yeah, we talk about them imagining a different future. Yeah, we can all imagine, but some do it better than others. Mary Quant just had a store on the King's Road, as I recall, and yet she changed an entire industry. So how did she imagine that? I know you probably haven't talked to her, but how do people do that? How do they lead a whole industry in a new direction?
I don't think they go into it with that plan. They just see things differently. I mean, the one that fascinates me from modern times is Steve Jobs. Does anyone doubt that if he had wanted to, he could have built at Apple a beautiful BlackBerry? He could have done as Facebook is doing now and created just another Twitter with threads. But Steve Jobs thought, well, no. What BlackBerry is doing is hopelessly dated. I don't want a phone like that. I don't want to be pushing buttons in. I'm going to do something all new. And so Mark Andreessen famously saw an early replica of it. And he said, well, people need to depress those buttons. He said, no, they don't. And so Steve Jobs led people and he was ridiculed. Think back at the time, the view was no one's going to pay $500 for a phone. As Steve Ballmer at Microsoft said at the time, it's going to be a niche device. BlackBerry certainly wasn't afraid of the iPhone. But Steve Jobs led people to an all new place. That's what entrepreneurs do.
So maybe there's a mindset there. I'm not sure we can analyze it, but you said people ridiculed him. You said in your article that Mary Quant's fashion was called degenerate and obscene. So there's got to be a mindset, at least, that's resistance to that kind of criticism, or maybe it's ornery, or maybe it's rebellious.
Oh, all those things. Of course, it's rebellious. Entrepreneurs can't stand conventional wisdom. But the conventional wisdom speaks to why they're entrepreneurs. What is an entrepreneur? It's someone who believes deeply in something that the vast majority of people inside and outside of business think is ridiculous. Because let's be clear, if they believed in something that was conventional, then it would already have been done. These are people who just think what exists is absurd and is hopelessly incorrect for what people need. And so they lead them in an all new direction. And thank goodness for that. But it also tells you, why can't government ever be in business? It can't for this reason. The vast majority of living individuals are constrained by the known. Governments not only are constrained by the known, but imagine if they tried to lead needs. It would be thousands and thousands of dry holes. Most entrepreneurs fail precisely because they want to change everything. And so governments can't do this. And it's not just because they're politicians. Entrepreneurs are doing something different.
Yeah, the other angle here that we like to think about a little bit, John, is empathy. That you said Mary Quant would dress women in clothes that gave them a feeling of freedom and liberation. And the key word we pick out of that sentence is feeling. And to interpret Mises, as you mentioned, he said that people have an unease. They can't quite articulate it. So maybe the entrepreneurs feel the unease and find ways to relieve it. Is that a way to think?
Oh, I think so. But in leading people, it's not, yeah, they're feeling an unease, but they're also thinking, oh, no, they don't really think that way. They really, the director, Mike Nichols, who sadly passed, at this point, 10 years ago or something like that, when he was making the movie The Graduate, The Graduate was about a blonde Protestant boy, basically from Pasadena, California, only for Mike Nichols to say, "Oh, Dustin Hoffman, you should play him." And Dustin Hoffman said, "Well, wait a second, I'm Jewish. I don't fit this character at all." And Mike Nichols said, "Well, maybe he's Jewish inside." And the point is entrepreneurs are they're unhappy with how things. They want to show something new, and so they sense an unease. They see what others don't see, and they want to create based on what others don't see. And thank goodness for them, because if you didn't have that, progress would cease. Entrepreneurs take the leaps without which we would be flatlining. And we know from Adam Smith that stationary societies repel capital. That's why it always fascinates me when politicians say, well, we're going to bring back those jobs that went offshore. I'm thinking, oh, wait, so you want to take us backwards? Because if you could do that, that would be very impoverishing. The reason the U.S. is the richest country on earth is that the work we do is constantly changing. And thank goodness for that.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things about fashion. At least they've internalized that everything's always changing all the time.
Well, look at Paris from last week. New York Times did the spread on the fashion that was shown at the various fashion shows. I believe it was Paris. New York has its runway shows too, and different cities do. I mean, to look at these clothes, you're thinking, wow, who on earth would wear them? But fashion, in the same way, they're always trying to lead us. There's always some new designer or an existing designer. They can't stay in business if they keep making the same things for people. To some degree, they've got to lead them in a new way, and they do, and it's beautiful. And who would want to live in a world without this?
Yeah. Yeah, we've been focusing a lot on that kind of change and speed of change, John. So Elon Musk keeps coming up all the time. They say there's 20 to 50 changes in a Tesla automobile in a week. He takes out wiring because there's 3 miles of wiring in a car and who needs it? And he got it down to, I don't know, 300 feet. And now it's down to 30 feet or something like that. He's always changing. That's his thing. So maybe that's entrepreneurship, is always changing, always wanting to change.
Oh, it's got to be. I get so mad at our side when they say he's a crony capitalist. Look at what as though government didn't want to give, the subsidy of $7,500 per car to every electronic car maker. Elon Musk decided the way they make cars, the way that they power cars was insufficient. and the risks he took to do that. Entrepreneurs so often have one big success on their resume, and then it's hard to recreate it, nor do they have the courage to recreate it. Every business he's started, he hasn't taken it to buy, he has bought houses, but he gradually just plows it back into the business and risked it all on a new way of people driving cars. And darn it, if he hasn't succeeded. I mean, everywhere you look, you see these. Now, I find Tesla's a bit frustrating just because they take so long to charge and everything. But I love people who want to do something different. And you look at that truck that he wants to put out, I couldn't be less interested in it, but that's the point. He constantly is taking us somewhere else. And thank goodness for people like him. I get so mad at our side when they reduce people to, well, he gets that subsidy. Sadly, if you want to do business in the United States, government finds you in ways that we don't like and offers subsidies. That doesn't mean that we should dismiss those who see differently.
Yeah, he also seems to be reinventing management. I've been reading about how Tesla runs its factory, and a lot of the decision making is algorithmic. You don't need managers to ask for permission. You just need to put the data in the algorithm, and the algorithm tells you whether that's the thing to do or not. You should be doing something else. So he's reinvented management, not just cars.
He seems to have, and this was something I read on the Mises.com website a ways back. Another thing I love about what he's doing is there's this paranoia in the United States right now. Well, the Chinese are watching how we do things and they're stealing ideas, as if it were that easy. I mean, for one, that insults business by presuming that you can just steal an idea and recreate it. They should be so lucky. But I also, along these lines, Elon Musk's point is come into my factories and watch how I do things. His view is that the more electric cars there are, the bigger the market there is, the bigger market for him to sell to. And so there's no desire to hide what he's doing. He's hoping people will copycat him, which is, again, it's an entrepreneurial thing that not enough people realize, that precisely because entrepreneurs believe deeply in something that's widely ridiculed, they're not fearful of new entrants. They need them. That validates their decision in the first place.
Yeah, in fact, I think they look at the economy differently than we have done traditionally. You're always told by the financial sector to think about the big companies. I think is MAMA is the acronym now of Meta and Amazon and Microsoft and so on. But they think of it as a network. People like Musk think of it as a network, or Eric Yuan at Zoom. It's about connecting entrepreneurs and sharing information. And that's how the economy grows, not by single companies out-competing others. So I think they think of the whole economy differently.
Yeah, because they know that knowledge drives it. And what does George Gilder say? He says, when you pump gasoline into your car, you're pumping knowledge into your car. And same idea here. When people work together, we know from Adam Smith that one person working in a pin factory could maybe produce one pin per day, but several men working together in specialized fashion can produce tens of thousands. And so think about what happens when thought is meshed, when thought gets together. The possibilities are endless. And so to separate people, and so along these lines is an interesting that, for one, Musk was very much against these hideous lockdowns. Imagine fighting a virus with the economic contraction. Historians will just marvel at the abject stupidity of both sides that they went in that direction. But it's not just the shutting down, it's the shutting down of the collaboration of people. He wanted people back in the office. He wanted people back in the factory right away. That's how you progress. It's this knowledge born of people working together, thinking together, and shame on so many for falling for the opposite of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to stay in this idea of the hidden entrepreneurs, we had Herman Simon on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and he's written a book called Hidden Champions, and it's about all of the unknown companies that aren't necessarily quoted on stock exchanges that do brilliant, innovative things deep in the value chain. He was talking about a company, I think it was Carl Zeiss, in photo optics that enables printing on a microchip and the gap to come down from 190 millimeters to 30 millimeters or something, which massively increases the power of the thing. No one's ever heard of that company. They've never heard of what they do, but entrepreneurs are doing those things in networks to get the end results that are visible, but we don't see them.
No, we don't. And that's why it's always funny when people ask me, well, I always say growing economies, the nature of work is changing all the time. They say, oh, what are the jobs of the future? And I say, well, if I know that, I'd be a billionaire. And I think you allude to it, that the companies of tomorrow that are going to transform us, we know they're coming, but we don't know where they're coming from. We have not heard of them. And we haven't heard of them for the reasons that we've discussed. Entrepreneurs are doing things that are rejected by certainly established businesses, because if they weren't, they'd be doing them, and they're rejected broadly. But rest assured that if you have me on 5 years from now, the 7 most successful, the most valuable U.S. companies almost certainly won't be Microsoft, Amazon, NVIDIA, and the different ones and Apple, the different ones from today. Progress is defined by the destruction of successful companies by the marketplace, not by their calcification.
Yeah, yeah, the Schumpeter theory. But why are those big companies? Why can't they be entrepreneurial? Why can't they change that fast? I mean, you look at them and you get bureaucracy, which Mises said was a killer because it doesn't have the P&L mentality. They've got DEI and ESG. They've got compliance. Why can't they break out of that and be entrepreneurial? Why can't they stay as entrepreneurial as they were to begin with?
It may surprise you, I kind of reject that DEI and ESG influences them. Show me a CEO that can get away with poor returns. Show me a money manager that can. I think they pay lip service to that because it's a good way of attracting talent. To me, the reason they can't remain entrepreneurial is that if you're already rich, those who want to be entrepreneurial are, for one, they're doing the crazy things away from the big businesses. But what does an entry-level person want to do? They want to be able to make the big money. An established company can pay you very well, but the equity that provides won't necessarily go up. In a new company trying to transform what we do, if that succeeds, you can make a lot of money. And so my strong sense is the reason that the big companies can't remain entrepreneurial is that they can't attract the talent to remain entrepreneurial. You're just attracting the kind of person who migrates to Amazon that's worth $1 trillion is wildly different from the kind of person that came to Amazon in 1996. I mean, we're talking about two different people. This person in 2023 wants some security. They want to know that they're getting a paycheck. They want to know that the equity they're getting is going to probably hold its value in some way. Someone in 1996 isn't sure about the paycheck, isn't sure the company's going to. That's a different worker altogether, and they're just not entrepreneurs by definition.
Yeah, that's a great insight. The other thing that we try to promote is that if you're a value creator, you create new value for customers. Customers are delighted. They pick up a new thing. That's what gets you noticed. That's what gets you promoted. But maybe it doesn't in those big companies.
But it speaks to the other thing. If you fail in a big company, again, you're already public. Big companies make lots of mistakes. Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft have made lots of mistakes. They're still being entrepreneurial, but failure becomes more costly if you're an established company with shareholders. Whereas if you're a private company trying to make it, there's a desire to take big risks that you can't as easily take, I don't think.
So you hinted in the same article, John, that, and we're meandering towards the idea that you can have institutional entrepreneurship too. You talked about Ed Crane, and he saw libertarianism not as a bunch of crazies, but as the possibility of a broad-based movement, and he built the Cato Institute to take the world in a different direction. Do we have that opportunity in politics and in government? And do you see entrepreneurship there?
Oh, I think so. I admire greatly what Ed did. A lot of people watching this either know Ed or have heard of him, but Ed looked like a Republican. He dressed like a Republican, or still does. But in his case, and that was by design. Cato was going to be conservative in appearance, but radical in views. And as you've alluded, he saw this very self-consciously weird movement that was libertarianism. He said, wait a second, that's not weird. it's perfectly normal. Lots of people don't want government involved in their private lives and would want a smaller government and don't like all the foreign adventurism. And so he made it elite. He made it mainstream. He said he went to people who were Republicans and said, no, no, really, you're more libertarian, because Ed could have easily started a very successful Republican think tank. Was he an entrepreneur because he didn't? No, Ed's an entrepreneur because he thought differently in the first place and thought, no, 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 this is what people think. And so he led an all new. I think he was ahead of his time. My guess is that libertarianism's best days are ahead of us as more and more Americans enter the upper middle classes. I think libertarianism was always an elite concept that is going to grow and grow in terms of prestige and influence as more and more Americans prosper. And so I think its best days are ahead of it. And so of course with thought, you hope that you constantly have people rethinking how things are thought. It's so dangerous if not, because if they're not rethinking how things are thought, let's just chat GPT it all.
Yeah, Sam Altman is certainly one of our entrepreneurs. But you talk about institutional entrepreneurship. We try to think the same way about Austrian economics. It's become a fringe kind of way of thinking about economics. It should be mainstream. It should be the way that you think about economics, about people and individuals, how they exchange things, where value comes from. And so we've got that same job to do. We need an Ed Crane.
No, I think so. I always tell people, because they say, well, why do you criticize the Austrians so much? I criticize the Austrians so much because if you could see my book collection, I've got just about every single Ludwig von Mises book. And if you could see my note pages and pages of notes inside the book, I do believe, as you allude, that the Mises Institute needs that Ed Crane, that person who will mainstream what is incredibly mainstream. What could be more mainstream than the idea that individuals drive progress, and that an economy is not some blob that you fiddle with and pump money into, but is in fact just a collection of individuals. And so I can't think of a book that's more mainstream than Human Action. And I can't think of rationale that's more mainstream than von Mises. And I always tell Austrians that you have a brand to protect. And so don't be weird. Act normal because your views are normal. And I think that's, again, to Ed's credit. Libertarianism was weird. He said, no, 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 we will act like normal people. We will dress like normal people. And in so doing, we will pull in normal people because our views are centrist. They're not hard right or hard left. They're just center views.
Yeah, we find entrepreneurship to be a vehicle for that. Huerta de Soto, Jesus Huerta de Soto, a living Austrian, says that entrepreneurship is what people do all day. It's a society-wide phenomenon. He characterizes it as creating new knowledge for people. And as you said, knowledge drives the economy, and therefore that drives growth and innovation. We could call it creating new value, but it's what we all do. It's what it's like.
It's our nature.
Yeah.
And it's particularly the nature of Americans. I once said to my wife, I said, well, Winston Churchill, love him or hate him, was half American. And her point was, no, what does American mean? American is just this stew of wild and crazy people from around the world who were going to risk it all to get a taste of freedom, personal and economic. We are so different from everyone. And is it any wonder that so much entrepreneurialism has emerged from this country? We descend from the people who made the most entrepreneurial act of all in some ways. They crossed an ocean to get here, all for a taste of freedom. And Americans are nuts. But nutty people do lots of interesting things. And what a place to live, what a place to witness all this.
There's also an ethic to it, which I don't think we communicate very well. This idea that I'm going to create value for you. It's going to take me some time. I've got some sacrifices to make. I have to borrow some money. I may have to take risk. But if I get it right, then the market's going to reward me. And there's a deep ethic in that. And yet capitalism is sometimes called exploitative and cold and harsh and dog eat dog and so on like that. Where does that come from?
Oh, that's just, I think some people say that, but sometimes our side will say, yeah, it's really hard in this world to say you're capitalist. And I say, oh, stop it. I think there's a lot of victimhood from our side about how, oh boy, capitalist, it's really a bad word. Show me where it's a bad word in society. Were people celebrating when Steve Jobs died? Americans love capitalism. But as von Mises so clearly pointed out, capitalism is nourishment for demagogues eager to bash it. You can't have AOC, you can't have Elizabeth Warren, you can't have Bernie Sanders without these great entrepreneurs. All three of those demagogic politicians are a creation of wild and crazy and fun and brilliant and insightful capitalism. I always tell people that if I was running the country, or how about if you and I were running the country, we'd have 50 Elizabeth Warrens. We'd have so many Bernie Sanders, your head would be spinning. And why would we? Because we'd want to deregulate and get government out of the way in total. And so out of that, you get a lot of nut jobs like them. But to me, they're a bullish creation of this wonderful country we live in, full of really innovative people.
So, John, that's a great illustration of what I'd like to talk about next, which is John Tamny, the original thinker. Elon Musk has got his thinking, he calls it first principles thinking, I believe, which I'm not sure I understand all the time, but that's how he invented the reusable rocket and those kinds of things. You have a version of that. I've been trying to analyze it. A lot of it is about people get causation in the wrong direction. I was reading something in a book review you wrote about Anna Karenina. Did I pronounce that right?
It's Anna Karenina. It took me a long time to figure that out. Karenina.
Okay. I'm not going to try that again. But you talked about Tolstoy as an original thinker, and you talked about, smart people are the ones who get educated. It's not education that creates smart people. You said about inflation that to say that higher wages or higher prices cause inflation is like saying stomachs cause chocolate. And so you see this idea of causation being reversed all the time. What's your thought process? How did that come about? Or tell us about your thinking.
Again, I don't think that way to piss people off. I find thinking hopelessly incorrect a lot of the time. And education's a good example. You show me a school full of interested, conscientious kids. I don't care if it's a state school, a private school, a charter school. It's going to be a great school. Kids bring the values of learning to it. People who want to learn then get educated. They're already smart. They just go to school and that validates their brain. They probably go to school to make friends for all I know, but they're already smart. I mean, what would be the most valuable thing that you could do if you wanted to prosper in the global economy today? If there's one thing you could learn, my speculation is the most valuable thing you could bring to the global economy was a knowledge of the English language. Well, so how did Martina Navratilova, one of the greatest tennis players who ever lived, learn English? She didn't have time to go to school after she escaped the repressive Czechoslovakian regime to get to the United States and pursue her dream. She watched I Love Lucy. She chose to be educated. She chooses to read lots of books. And I hear this all the time. People say, well, if we just had better schools, if schools would stop failing students, oh, stop it. America is full of people who were never educated in the first place, but they chose to learn things. They chose to be well-read. If you want to learn English, you will learn it. If you want to learn to read, you'll learn. I'm not saying that people shouldn't go to school. School's great. Going to college in the United States, what could be better than that? But learnedness is a choice. And if you're waiting for others to teach you, I'm sorry, I can't help you.
So that's a specific example of causation being the wrong way around. Do you have any analysis of why we misunderstand causation? I mean, systems thinking theorist says there is no causation. Stuff just happens. It's interaction. We'll see what happens after we keep interacting. But you say, no, get to basics. There is causality. You just got to get it the right way around.
I think there's a tendency with some things for people to take the easy path. And I'm not talking about through education. Oh, yeah, I learned this in school. Oh, no, you didn't. You would have figured this out on your own very easily. I love when people say, well, I want to become an entrepreneur and I'm going to college for it. Oh my gosh, what could you learn about being an entrepreneur from professors who are teaching you yesterday's news? Entrepreneurs, by definition, are doing crazy stuff. They are doing the impossible. The Wright brothers, when they thought, well, actually man can fly when everyone knew that man couldn't fly, were viewed as nut jobs. They were literally at Kitty Hawk flapping their arms to mimic birds to try to figure out how to get for people to fly. Did Jeff Bezos go to Princeton and major in internet? No, he invented internet retail. And that's always the case. And so I think there's a tendency for people to say, well, yeah, he went to a good school. No, no, no. The US is rich and has brilliant, beautiful schools because people were free, and free people who are ambitious prosper. Schools are what happened after that. I've always felt that way. I've always written that. I was so glad to see that Tolstoy validated hundreds of years ago, he was way ahead of me, validated this basic truth that schools are a consequence of prosperity. They don't drive.
You're also pretty skeptical in many cases about expertise, that experts tend to live inside a set of data that says that they've got it right. No one else can do the analysis they can. We've got to listen to them. And one of the examples you use is global warming and climate change. And you said, hey, if the experts were right about that, rich people wouldn't be buying waterfront property in Miami.
Yeah, no, they wouldn't. But let's also look at the whole world. 44% of the world's population live in coastal cities, and that number is rising, rising, rising. And it's rising because most opportunity exists in coastal cities. That's where the most valuable properties are. If it were true, as the warmists say, that, oh, these are all going underwater, I think we would see an outmigration. The global marketplace is pretty information pregnant. And so there's a tendency to ignore what the marketplace, which is people. We obviously saw that during the lockdowns. Well, the experts believe this. Well, even if they do believe it, your path to knowledge is to figure out what those who disagree with the experts are doing. You wanted people to reject Anthony Fauci's wisdom to see if he was wrong, as in the most important people during the lockdowns were the people who should have been hitting every bar and every party and making out with every girl and guy they could, because we find out from the rebels if what's accepted by the experts is true. And you go back in time, the Soviet Union had tons of experts, but you can never replace the genius of the marketplace, which is just people, with the narrow knowledge of experts. And so when experts say, if we don't act, a crisis awaits, they're professing a self-fulfilling prophecy. Of course, the crisis will result from their acting. You can never have a crisis when people are free, and you can't, because free people are information personified. They are the wealth, they are the knowledge. If you suffocate that wealth and knowledge, you get crisis every time.
Yeah. So how do you think we stand today? I'm an old guy and I'm not very in touch with the young generation, John, and I sometimes wonder, are they more entrepreneurial? Are they more libertarian? Are they more eager for freedom? I see all the startup businesses on the internet, but I sometimes think, hey, that's not really innovation. It's doing what Jeff Bezos did a long time ago and just distributing it more broadly. What's your feeling about the next generation of entrepreneurs?
They'll be the richest generation in the history of the richest nation in the history of the world, until the next generation is the richest nation in the history of the richest nation. The only constant in a free society is progress, and the only constant about capitalists is they always outrun government. And as technology gets better and better, their ability to outrun government grows and grows and grows. And so people say, oh, yeah, these kids are spoiled. Oh, they're so entitled. Well, of course they are. That's the most bullish signal of all. They've grown up with all this abundance. But in growing up with it, they see its flaws, and they're going to reshape it. They're going to create new things that make the present look impoverished by comparison. It's just their nature to do this. Now, people say, well, he's wrong. I've got some millennials or some Generation Z types who work for me, and they're hopeless. They've always been saying that. I always remind people that Elwood, what was his last name? He was writing about young people, and he said, oh, yeah, you couldn't even try communism on them because they're so lazy. They don't even work for themselves, let alone other people. Young people are hopeless, blah, 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 blah. He was writing this in 1899 about the American people. Every generation is seen as lazy and unfocused until they basically kick the ass of the existing generation, and don't think that these young people won't come up with things that won't blow us away and that will make Steve Jobs look kind of boring by comparison. I would give anything to be a young person today, to be born today, to think what they're going to create. It's going to be amazing.
Well, maybe one of the places they'll do that is crypto, replacing conventional money. I'll mention your latest book. You call it The Money Confusion, How Illiteracy about Currencies and Inflation Sets the Stage for the Crypto Revolution. So you must believe there's going to be a crypto revolution, do you?
I think there's going to be a private money revolution. I prefer private money. I think that's what Mises referred to it as. Yes, capitalist society that can put supercomputers in our pockets, a capitalist society that can build buildings that will go miles into the sky, and that's eventually where we'll get, can easily produce a trusted form of money. And that's what markets want. How do we know markets want that? Because there's 10 trillion a day in currency trading, not because people love to move money around, but because money isn't trusted. And when it's not trusted, you must hedge that constantly. And so what does Jeff Bezos, what did he always say in the past? Your margin is my opportunity. Well, there are profits in trading currencies. Is that the most profitable way for investment banks to operate? No, it's not. Let's be clear. Investment banking and money management is what makes them the real money. But there is money being made in trading right now, which exists as the opportunity for entrepreneurs to circulate money that actually holds its value. And as we know from back when money had stable definitions, going pre-1971, there were no currency markets. Why would there? Money was just a measure. And so the markets, 10 trillion in currency trading is the margin that capitalists are going to erase. And I think they'll erase it through money that we actually trust and will start circulating. Let's never forget that markets decide what money circulates. It's a big mistake that a lot of Austrians make. They say, well, the central bank pumped money supply. No. Markets decide what money circulate because producers only accept certain mediums when they hand out the goods and services they've created. And so I think capitalists are going to create money that we can trust, and it's going to be the end of government's monopoly on money, and that will be a very positive thing.
Well, John, you're always an optimist and an inspiration when thinking in those refreshing terms. So
keep talking.
So thank you very much. We appreciate your point of view and your different thinking and your love of capitalism, which I share, but I sometimes get a little bit more depressed than you do.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I'm a big fan. Please keep sending me your columns. I wish you wrote more of them, but send me what you write, and hopefully it's not behind a paywall.
It never will be.
Okay, good.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
This has been another episode of the Value Creators Podcast. Thanks for listening. You can visit thevaluecreators.com for links and resources related to this episode, and check out hunterhastings.com for more content on entrepreneurial business management based on value creation principles.